Under the unrelenting blaze of a merciless sun, the gunslinger trudged across the barren stretch of desert, his boots stirring dust that hung like ghosts in the dry air. Sweat mixed with the grit on his weathered face, tracing the scars that mapped a lifetime of battles no one dared ask about. His eyes, sharp and haunted, caught sight of something unusual resting against a sun-baked rock. A small bundle wrapped in coarse, faded cloth. As he drew closer, the ragged folds peeled back to reveal an Apache baby, fragile and wide-eyed, clutching a delicate amulet carved with a strange symbol that shimmered softly, as if holding a quiet prayer. The gunslinger froze, a storm of suspicion and an unexpected tenderness wrestling within him. Could this forsaken child be a message from heaven? Or a trap bound to drag him deeper into the unforgiving wilds? The desert around him was a vast ocean of cracked earth and thorny brush, where the wind whispered secrets best left unheard. Heat shimmered in trembling waves off the baked ground, and the silence pressed heavy, broken only by the distant caw of a solitary raven. This was a land both beautiful and lethal, a place that shaped men by their endurance, or broke them by their fear. For the gunslinger, solitude was a shield and a shackle. Here, in this merciless expanse, every step was a gamble against death's constant shadow. He knelt slowly, fingers rough yet gentle, as they traced the contours of the infant's tiny face. The baby's dark eyes held a calm that unsettled him, as if understanding the dangers that hovered just beyond sight. The gunslinger's coat was tattered, edges singed from past fires, and his hands bore the calluses of years gripping cold steel. Beneath the brim of his battered hat, a flicker of memory passed, visions of a past soaked in blood and loss, the weight of a legacy he neither sought nor could escape. Now, faced with this silent, burdensome life, doubt gnawed at his stoic heart. To protect or abandon, to trust destiny's cruel hand, or retreat into the familiar numbness of isolation. A creeping awareness surged within him. This child was no mere innocent left to chance. The amulet pulsed faintly, an emblem whispered among Apache elders as one of sacred protection and urgent warning. To harbor the baby was to invite peril, enemies hidden in the endless horizon, shadows cast by those who hunted secrets as fiercely as men hunted game. The gravity of their predicament tightened around the gunslinger's throat. Their fates were now entwined. This was the thorny beginning of a journey neither could escape. He wrapped the infant securely in his dry shirt, the coarse fabric rubbing against tender skin, his breath shallow and measured. Every cautious sound, every subtle shift in the baby's restless body, echoed in the vast emptiness surrounding them. The gunslinger's gaze darted upward, scanning the barren silhouette of mesas against the burning sky, his senses razor-sharp. In the fragile heartbeat shared between man and child, a silent bond began to weave, a thread of reluctant hope, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, swelling steadily, stirring the dust on the horizon like a storm's herald. Shapes, dark, mounted figures, crept closer with grim purpose, their presence slicing through the desert's oppressive stillness. The gunslinger's hand tightened on the cloth that shielded the child, his pulse quickening in a rising tide of fear and fierce resolve. The hunters had found them. No words were spoken, but the threat hung brutal and clear in the scorching air. The path ahead was fraught and merciless. The chase had begun. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, ou algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. The gunslinger tightened his grip on the rough fabric that wrapped the APACHE baby, the tiny bundle pressed close to his chest, feeling impossibly fragile against the coarse weave of his shirt. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, but the shadow of menace grew darker with each pounding hoofbeat that quickened behind them. The horizon, once empty and silent, now stirred with the restless surge of pursuers, tracking their every step. His leather boots crunched carefully over the cracked earth as they pushed forward, weaving between scattered patches of thornbush and jagged stones that threatened to throw him off balance. The baby's soft breaths whispered against his skin, but the silence it brought was heavier than any shout, as if the child carried a calm that held the weight of unseen storms. Every so often, the amulet around the infant's neck shifted, catching a shard of sunlight and casting a faint, ethereal glow in the dust-laden air. That mysterious symbol seemed less a trinket and more a talisman, binding them both to a fate the gunslinger had yet to fully understand. Memories gnawed at the edges of his mind like a rabid coyote. The bitter taste of regret, old blood debts, faces lost to time, all pushing forward as a tide of warning. Protecting this child meant stepping deeper into shadows he had long resisted. He was no stranger to the harsh judgment of the unforgiving frontier, nor to the unforgiving axe that had branded his soul. Yet here he was, clutching this APACHE child like a fragile ember amid the vast, dry wilderness, a flicker of life threatening to ignite a firestorm. A sudden rustle, sharper than a whisper, cut through the tense quiet. The gunslinger froze, instincts razor-edged. Leaning just enough, his gaze caught movement. A lone figure partially concealed behind a rugged outcrop, eyes fixed on them. The stranger was a tracker, silent and calculating, their presence both a threat and a puzzle. Not yet a hunter, but no ally either. This watcher's allegiance was a question mark, sharp and unyielding, like the desert rock beneath his boots, pressing onward toward the knot of ruins. Perched on the canyon's rim, the gunslinger's mind raced. The skeletal remains of weathered stone seemed a cruel mockery of shelter, cold and hollow, promising little comfort or safety. Yet here lay their only hope against the circling predators. The baby stirred against his chest, its gaze lifting toward him, unblinking and inscrutable. In those dark eyes he glimpsed a silent plea, or perhaps the echo of an ancient warning. The amulet pulsed again, almost alive with a light only the desperate could sense. They reached the edge of the canyon just as the first shouts rang out behind them, a ragged chorus carried by the dry wind. The distant figures spurred their mounts hard, their shadows stretching fast across the land, closing the gap with urgent menace. The gunslinger's jaw clenched. The chase was no longer distant rumble, but a looming storm. He ducked beneath the crumbled arch of the ruin's entrance, the stone rough against his palms. Inside, the coolness was a sharp contrast to the burning sky outside, but the silence was soon shattered by the baby's brief, sharp cry, fragile and human, but startling in its rawness. The gunslinger's hand paused, calming the infant with a practiced gentleness that surprised even himself. Despite the weight of his weary soul, an ember of something softer, something fiercely protective, began to kindle. Time folded strange in those ancient stones. The gunslinger sat with the baby cradled carefully, head bowed in thought and silent prayer to powers both forgotten and feared. The amulet's symbol, etched with an artistry far older than the scars on his flesh, seemed to whisper of battles beyond bullets and blood, of a message from a realm beyond mortal reach, a message born in heaven and carried by this child. Outside, the soft footfalls of the tracker grew more purposeful. The gunslinger's eyes narrowed. He could hear the faint scrape of boot against stone, the cool breath of shadows closing in. The enemy was close, their patience thinning, their hunger for the child's secret urgent and cruel. To protect the baby now meant standing not just against men with guns, but against a tide of terror that sought to snatch away the fragile hope wrapped in cloth. His fingers tightened briefly on the amulet, feeling its cold weight against the skin, as if it held the silence of the desert itself. The gunslinger's heart pulsed with fierce determination. Every instinct screamed to run, to vanish like the desert wind. But something in the child's steady gaze anchored him. This was not just a fight for survival, but a stand for redemption and something far greater than his own battered soul. Then came a crack, a single, deafening rifle shot, echoing sharp and cruel across the canyon walls, shattering the fragile calm like glass. The sound tore through the still air, setting the chase into ruthless motion. Echoes bounced off the rock faces, followed quickly by the baying of horses, urged onward by grim riders with merciless resolve. The gunslinger rose, instinct swift and sure, clenching the baby to his chest before sprinting deeper into the stony maze. The ruin's shadows folded around him like a cloak, but they would not be enough to hide them for long. Each step was a promise etched in dust and danger. He would not let the child fall to those shadows, whatever the cost. The pursuer's cries drew nearer, relentless and cold. Time narrowed to the thunder of hooves and the desperate rhythm of a lone man running against fate itself. With the echo of gunfire ringing in his ears, The gunslinger pushed forward into the uncertain darkness ahead, carrying the weight of a message from heaven that might yet change the bloodied course of the West. The hunters were closing in. Now there was no turning back. As dusk began to drape its purple veil across the canyon's jagged edges, the gunslinger settled within the shadowed ruins, the baby swaddled close against his chest. The fading light cast long, trembling silhouettes across the broken stone, as if the very walls themselves murmured forgotten tales from a time when this place had shelter and meaning. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the crevices, carrying with it the faint, unsettling weight of secrets. Beneath his calloused fingers, the amulet hung heavy, its strange symbol flickering in the dimness like a dying star. The gunslinger's eyes, sharp and wary, scanned the worn engraving as if seeking answers beyond the grasp of memory. Those vague stories of the Apache he'd overheard in dusty saloons and around flickering campfires gnawed at him. Tales of spirits, messages from the sky, and a prophecy spoken in riddles. He knew only fragments, half-truths woven with fear and reverence, yet he felt the gravity of what the baby carried, tangible like the weight of his own haunted past. A rustle outside snapped him sharply to attention. His hand instinctively moved to the worn Colt at his hip, as footsteps, quiet but deliberate, approached the crumbled archway. From the shadows stepped a figure, Taina. Her dark eyes were hard and unreadable, her face framed by the loose strands of jet-black hair falling from a worn leather headband. Her presence was at once a surprise and a confirmation of everything he feared. The gunslinger knew of the Apache woman's reputation. A fierce guardian with a history as tangled and dangerous as his own. Taina's steady gaze dropped to the child cradled in his arms. For long moments, she said nothing, as if measuring whether the man before her was friend or foe. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling and uncurling. Against the fabric, its serene eyes meeting hers with eerie calm. Taina's lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of concern breaking through her guarded facade. "You don't belong here," she finally said, voice low and edged with reproach. "But that child, she belongs to this land." The gunslinger's voice was graveled and cautious. "I don't know what she is, or what she carries, but I promised I'd keep her safe." Taina's eyes narrowed, shadows deepening beneath them. "You carry her, but do you carry the truth? The message she bears isn't just hope. It's a flame that could burn everything down." A silence grew thick between them, charged with the unspoken histories of their peoples, of betrayals, losses, and the fragile threads of trust torn and mended over decades. Taina hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper meant only for him and the child. "I will guide you through the treacherous paths, but understand, your loyalty will be tested." Her tone was stern, yet beneath it flickered a reluctant tenderness. "The enemies hunting her are darker than you imagine." Together, they moved deeper into the ruins, the crumbling stones a fragile fortress against the encroaching night. Taina's footsteps were sure and light, the knowledge of the land etched into her very soul. The gunslinger found himself watching her, the way her eyes caught stray moonlight, how her hands moved with practiced grace. feeling the uneasy stirring of alliance, fragile as the stark desert flowers that bloom after the storm. They shared no words of their pasts, but their silence spoke volumes. The gunslingers. Mind flickered with the ghosts of a violence he could never fully outrun, while Taina's shadowed eyes held memories of a people wounded yet unbowed. Between them grew an unsteady truce, born not of friendship, but of necessity, and a mutual stake in survival. As the embers of the day bled out, the gunslinger knelt beside a shallow depression where wild grasses struggled for life amid cracked earth. The symbol, he finally murmured, pulling the amulet forth to catch the pale moonlight. It's a warning, or a guide. Something meant for those who know how to read it. Taina knelt beside him, tracing the worn lines with a fingertip calloused by hardship. It speaks of a child chosen to carry messages from heaven, signs of hope and destruction. There are those who fear this. Power. Her voice dropped, heavy with the weight of old fears, and those that would kill to possess it. Their quiet conversation was shattered by the sudden, brutal crack of a rifle, echoing off the canyon walls. The sound tore through the stillness, sharp as the bite of a rattlesnake. Both flinched, the baby's soft cry cutting through the tense air. Feet pounded close behind the ruined walls. Vultures cloaked in black, shadows moving with deadly intent. No time. The gunslinger growled, gathering the child tight against his chest. Taina's voice was steel. They've come for her. We'll hold them off. But we must move, quickly. The two bolted from the fragile safety of the ruins, the moonlight fleeting as the darkness of pursuit closed like a noose. Horses thundered in the distance, relentless and unyielding, their riders driven by greed and malice. The terrain twisted into a maze of stone and shadow, each step weighted by the promise of violence. Between hurried breaths and pounding hearts, an unspoken vow passed between them, to shield this tiny bearer of the celestial message at any cost. The gunslinger, his weathered hands steady despite the storm inside, followed Taina's lead through the stony labyrinth. But as they rounded a jagged outcrop, a sudden crash split the night. The shouts of assailants closing in, voices growling in cruel hunger. The fragile alliance was tested, the battle imminent. From the darkness, cloaked figures emerged, tendrils of rage and desperation in their eyes. The gunslinger gritted his teeth, his hand closing around the Colt with unwavering resolve. The night was breaking, and, with it, the shadow of ambush. The group was caught in a merciless trap, their sanctuary invaded, their hope endangered. The gunslinger's grip tightened, heart hammering in defiant rhythm. The fight for the child had only just begun. The night air still trembled with the echoes of gunfire, a brutal rupture in the fragile peace the ruins had offered. The hunters had not given chase by chance. Their ambush was no random act. It was a calculated strike against something far more dangerous than any man with a pistol. The gunslinger's breath was ragged, his arms tightening instinctively around the Apache baby as Taina's sharp voice broke through the night. "They've come for her," she said with a fierce edge, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the crumbling walls. "This child carries more than just an amulet. It's a message, a beacon of hope to the tribes, but a threat to a darker force, bent on twisting that power for their own." Her gaze locked onto his, grave and unyielding. We're not just running from men. We're running from a cult that fears the light this child brings. The gunslinger's jaw clenched beneath the dust and stubble, the weight of their words settling like wildfire in his chest. His hands moved to uncover the amulet, the faint glow pulsating softly in the half-light. He traced the worn symbol again, lines swirling into shapes that seemed alive, ancient as the desert stones themselves. You mean that shadowy figure? The one they call the Dark Shaman? His voice was low, almost a growl. They want to harness whatever that child carries. Tanya nodded grimly. He's their leader. A man wrapped in legend and fear, commanding followers who would spill blood to claim what's hers. That message the baby bears is more than words written. It's a prophecy. One warning of old powers returning. Powers that could ignite war or reshape the very soul of this land. Behind them, the wind seemed to whisper ominously through the ruined arches, carrying the burden of forgotten battles and lost souls. The weight rolled between the two like a shared secret, binding them tighter than choice or trust ever could. We can't stay, Tanya stated, pulling a worn leather map from the folds of her worn jacket. The faded lines marked hidden paths and forbidden trails carved by the ancestors, routes the hunters wouldn't dare follow. If we linger, they'll find. Yes, again, we move at dawn, but not before we decipher what's truly bound to that amulet. The gunslinger nodded, eyes flicking toward the silent child nestled in his arms. The baby's steady breath was a fragile pulse against the harshness surrounding them. Yet it embodied a power that had already changed him, turned his hardened heart towards something he thought he'd lost long ago. Hope. A sudden noise snapped their attention, a rustle from the shadows. Both hands went instinctively to their weapons, but the figure emerging was no hostile. It was a tall man, draped in rough robes, eyes burning with conflict and haunted purpose. "You're not alone," the stranger said, voice grave but urgent. "Many fear what she carries. The cult is relentless. If we don't stand united, everything the prophecy warns of will come to pass." Tana's eyes narrowed, weighing the stranger's words against the cold truth they both knew. "Trust is a rare thing on these lands," she said. "But if your warning is true, then we have no choice. The child must be protected, no matter the cost." The gunslinger's gaze remained fixed on the baby. Small fingers curled weakly around the fabric of his coat. "I've spent my life running from shadows," he murmured. "But this I'll fight for. Not for redemption alone, but for something beyond myself." The ruins around them seemed to hold their breath, as if time itself paused in anticipation. The ancient stones bore witness to the fragile alliance that blossomed in the heart of desperation. Yet danger crept closer with every beat. The cult's shadow stretched, long and dark across the land, its tendrils nearly choking the hope that flickered like a candle in the wind. Suddenly, without warning, a rush of movement erupted nearby. A figure darted through a narrow crack in the battlements, swift and silent. The gunslinger's eyes narrowed, recognizing the movement as no stranger, but a cloaked assailant. Before either could react, the thief lunged, snatching the gunslinger's pack. the one containing the vital documents. Secrets that could change the course of their fight. No! The gunslinger's voice was a growl, fury igniting his limbs. He sprinted after the shadow, heart pounding like thunder beneath the quiet sky. Taina cursed softly, her eyes blazing with determination. They've taken it. That pack holds the truth, the history, the maps, the key to the prophecy. Without it, we're lost. The night twisted into chaos as the pursuit turned personal. The chase was no longer just survival, but retribution, possession, and the cruel pull of fate tightening its grip. The gunslinger's boots kicked up dust that mingled with the ghosts of battles past, each step driven by the savage need to reclaim what was stolen, not just for him, but for the fragile future carried in the child's silent gaze. The cult's whispers grew louder on the wind, shadows lengthened, closing in like claws. The gunslinger's breath burned, sweat and grit colliding on cracked lips. His eyes burned bright, not with despair, but with the fierce, unyielding fire of a man who had found a reason to fight, even in a world set aflame with sorrow and betrayal. The hunt was no longer distant. It was on him, and the stakes were clear. The pack was gone. The pursuit had become a war of wills. And the gunslinger could only swear one thing. This was no longer about survival. It was personal. The gunslinger's breaths came harsh and ragged as he darted deeper into the stony maze of the canyon ruins, the Apache baby warm against his chest. The relentless pounding of hooves behind them grew closer, a dark tide of pursuers driven by merciless purpose. His mind, burdened by a violent past he could never fully escape, surged with bitter memories, blood spilled on foreign soil, faces twisted in anguish, the weight of his own hands stained forever. Now that past hunted him, sharpened by the child he swore to protect. Every step he took was measured, but desperate, navigating jagged stones underfoot, while the infant stirred with quiet urgency. The amulet that hung against the baby's soft skin pulsed faintly, a beacon, or perhaps a warning, from some ancient power beyond mortal grasp. It pressed on the gunslinger's soul, reminding him that this child was no simple bundle of flesh and bone. She carried a message that could reshape the very fate of the West. Just as the sun disappeared behind crimson cliffs, the gunslinger spotted movement, shadows shifting against the broken walls. His hand tightened on the Colt at his hip, eyes darting to catch every flicker beyond the ruins. From the dusk emerged Taina, her form lithe and formidable, her dark eyes fierce beneath the falling twilight. The lines of hardship and loss etched on her face only deepened the gravity in those silent moments. "You don't belong here," Taina said softly, her voice a low, steady thread cutting through the thickening silence. Her gaze locked on the child, cradled carefully in his arms, tracing the fragile mystery wrapped in coarse cloth. "But that child, she belongs to this land." The gunslinger's voice was gravel and regret. "I don't know what she is, or what she carries, but I promise to keep her safe." Taina's eyes narrowed, suspicion lingering like a shadow between them. "You carry her, but do you carry the truth? The message she bears isn't just hope. It's a flame that could burn everything to ashes." A tension grew, thick as desert dust before a storm. the unpoken history between their worlds, a history drenched in betrayal and sorrow, pressed heavily between them. Yet beneath Taina's wary exterior flickered something softer, recognition of a man trying fiercely to atone for a past where mercy was a stranger. "I'll guide you through the paths no man dares tread," she whispered, stepping into the ruins' fragile shelter. "But your loyalty will be tested. The enemies hunting her are no mere thieves or brigands. They come for a power darker than this world can bear." Together, they moved cautiously into the shadows, the ruins cradling them in cold stone silence. Taina's footsteps were certain, a rhythm born of blood and land whispered through generations. The gunslinger's hard gaze followed her, caught in the fragile truce forming between raw survival and an uneasy trust neither wanted but both needed. Kneeling beside a patch of hardy grasses, struggling to survive amid cracked earth, the gunslinger brought forth the amulet, fingers tracing the symbol etched in ancient lines. "It's a warning," he murmured, "or a guide. Something meant for those who understand its language." Taina reached out, her calloused fingertips skimming the worn carvings. It speaks of a child, chosen to carry messages from heaven, signs born of hope and destruction. There are those who fear this power, and there are those who would spill blood to claim it. Their whispered words were swallowed by the night, broken suddenly by a rifle's sharp report, tearing across the canyon walls. The bullet's echo was a harsh scream against the fragile night's calm. The baby cried out, a small, piercing sound, vulnerable and startling in the bleak quiet. "Time's run out," Taina growled, eyes flashing, steel. "They've come for her. We'll hold them off, but we have to move, now." No hesitation remained. They sprinted across broken ground, shadows fleeing before the cruel moonlight, the deafening thunder of horses chasing them through the narrow passages. The pursuers' voices, cruel and relentless, rose in deafening hunger. A sudden movement cut through the chaos. A figure slid from stone to shadow with practiced ease. The gunslinger's heart stuttered in recognition, a cloaked ambusher, swift and deadly. Before either he or Taina could react, the thief's fingers tore into the gunslinger's pack, a worn leather bag containing documents, maps, and secrets crucial to the fragile thread of their survival. "No!" The gunslinger's voice erupted, low and raw, as fury ignited every muscle. He tore after the shadow, racing through the maze of rock. Every pounding step, a promise of retribution. Taina cursed softly behind him. That pack held the truth, a history, the key to the prophecy. Without it, we're lost. Darkness closed in like a noose, the cult's grip tightening with every breath. Their whispers stretched across the land like poison, sharp and unyielding. But the gunslinger's eyes blazed, not with surrender, but with a ferocity born from the knowledge that this fight was no longer for mere survival. His past was a ghost. His future depended on the child cradled in his arms. The stolen pack meant more than maps. It held the spirit of hope wrapped in an ancient message. He'd run from many shadows before, but now he swore silently to never turn away again. The hunt had become a war of wills. They would pay any price to save the child. Then, through the cacophony of pursuit, silence sliced sharper than any bullet. Taina's scream shattered the night. She had been taken. The gunslinger skidded to a halt, senses screaming alarm. His hands tightened fiercely around the baby. They were vulnerable now, their fragile bond threatened by the cruel hands of fate. And in the darkness, the shadow of the Zama Sombrio loomed nearer than ever. The gunslinger's fingers trembled as he navigated the treacherous rocky slopes. The Apache baby clutched tightly against his chest, as if she were the last ember in a dying fire. The oppressive silence of the canyon was shattered by the thunder of hooves closing in behind him, relentless and merciless. Each labored breath burned his lungs, the desert air heavy with the scent of dust and danger. His mind, weighed down by chains forged long ago in blood and regret, stirred with a fierce resolve. This child, fragile yet unyielding under his coarse shirt, was no ordinary burden. The strange glow from the amulet nestled against her skin pulsed softly, a heartbeat older than any man who chased them. It whispered of lost legends and promises unkept, binding them both to a fate that neither could deny. The cliffs loomed overhead, jagged and unforgiving. Ahead, a narrow channel of shadowed ruins beckoned, a final hope against the encroaching darkness. The gunslinger's boots scrabbled over loose stones, his gaze flickering toward the distant figures pursuing them. Grim silhouettes riding hard, their hunger thinly veiled beneath taut leather and cold eyes. Suddenly, Taina emerged from the gloom like a silent wraith, her dark eyes burning with fierce determination. She moved with the surety of one born from this harsh land, her footsteps soundless yet commanding. Without hesitation, she reached the gunslinger, her sharp voice cutting through the heavy air. "We don't have time to waste. They won't stop until that child is ours or dead." The gunslinger barely nodded, pain and guilt etched deep into every line on his weary face. "I promised I'd keep her safe," he growled, tightening his hold around the baby's small form, feeling the faint rise and fall of her uncertain breath. "Come, we move now, or we die here." Together, they slipped through the crumbling archways of the ancient ruin, shadows swallowing their forms. The stones, worn and cracked from centuries of desert torment, offered little sanctuary, but enough to slow their pursuers. Taina's eyes scanned the perimeter, sharp and unyielding. This child carries more than hope. She carries a power that could tilt the balance of this land forever, she whispered. The gunslinger's jaw clenched. "The amulet, it's the key. I felt it burn against my skin back in the light. What is it?" His voice softness betrayed the hard edge of a man, desperate for answers. "An ancient seal," Taina said, tracing a finger over the worn carvings now faint in the moonlight. "A message from the spirits themselves. The baby is a vessel, chosen by our ancestors to carry this message through a time of darkness. But there are those who would drown that light out with blood." Their whispered exchange was fractured by the sudden crack of a rifle ringing out across the canyon walls. The bullet shattered the quiet, slicing the night with cruel precision. The baby cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that twisted the gunslinger's gut, and the hunters' voices roared closer, their merciless hunger tangible in the air. "Get ready," Taina hissed, drawing a worn revolver from her belt. Her eyes met his, fiery, unyielding. We hold them off. You protect the child. He nodded grimly, rolling a ragged cigarette between fingers as old and cracked as the land itself. The ruins erupted with tension, every shadow a potential enemy. The night grew dense with possibilities of death. Their attackers burst from the darkness, figures cloaked in black, moving like ghosts with rifles leveled and desperation etched into every step. Taina's shots cracked through the air, precise and deadly. The gunslinger's Colt spat fire, carving a path through the advancing shadows. The baby, wrapped tight, remained oddly calm, as if shielded by the very power she carried. Amid the chaos, subtle but stunning moments of the supernatural flickered, sparkling embers hovering in the air like will-o'-the-wisps. A chilling breeze that extinguished flames but left the child's amulet glowing fiercely. Each miracle was a whisper from the heavens, an echo of forgotten power awakening. But the battle's tide was cruel and shifting. Amid the gunfire and gun smoke, the gunslinger spotted a swift figure slipping through the breach, a cloaked assailant, silent and precise. In one swift motion, the shadowy thief snatched the gunslinger's pack, the battered leather bag containing precious documents, maps, and secrets vital to their survival. No, the gunslinger roared, fury zesting his veins like wildfire. His boots pounded hard as he charged after the shadow, heart pounding a ruthless war drum in his chest. Taina cursed low, eyes flashing with grim ice. The pack, the truth is inside. Without it, we're lost. The canyon twisted into a maze, a labyrinth of stone and shadow, concealing friend and foe alike. The thief's footsteps echoed faint and taunting, but the gunslinger's resolve burned brighter than ever. He was no longer a man running blindly through the desert. He had a mission, a duty beyond redemption, to protect this child, this bearer of a message from heaven. Rounding a ragged bend, a scream rent the air, sharp, wild, desperate. Taina's voice shattered the night's breathless tension, and the gunslinger skidded to a halt, senses ablaze with alarm. She had been taken. In that suspended heartbeat, the gunslinger's world narrowed to the fragile life cradled in his arms, and the shadow of the Zama Sombrio stretching nearer than ever before. The gunslinger arrived at the Apache enclave, under a sky bruised with the last light of dusk, the baby cradled gently but firmly against his chest. The air hung heavy with tension as Taina led him through the circle of earthen lodges and fire pits, where the council of elders had gathered. Their faces were etched with lines of age and wisdom, eyes sharp and guarded, as they regarded the stranger who bore their sacred child. Despite the wary silence, there was something in the gunslinger's steady posture, a glint of reverent courage beneath his hardened exterior, that shifted the mood ever so slightly. Taina, standing by his side, watched the elders with a mix of defiance and respect, her hands resting lightly on her worn knife hilt. One of the oldest men spoke first, his voice gravelly but authoritative. "You are a man marked by shadows, gunslinger. What brings you into our camp with this child born of our blood?" His eyes fixed on the baby, as if searching for clues beyond the cloth that swaddled her. The gunslinger inhaled deeply. the weight of his past pressing down, yet the warmth radiating from the infant steadied him. I carry her because I promised to protect her. This child holds a message, not just for your people, but for all who live this land. She is the hope our ancestors spoke of. A murmur rippled through the council. Not all were convinced. Suspicion lingered like smoke in their gaze. The scars of history hard to erase, even with words. Another elder, younger but no less fierce, muttered, "And yet, you are a man of the white man's world, a world that has not been kind to us. Why should we trust you?" The gunslinger's eyes darkened, haunted by memories he'd rather keep buried. Blood spilled by his own hand, promises broken. "I am not here to erase the past," he replied low, "but to offer a chance to change what comes next." Taina stepped forward, voice unwavering. "He has walked through fire to bring us this child. The trust is fragile, but so is the life she carries. Our people must decide to protect her, though it means trusting an outsider." The council fell into silent deliberation, the flickering flames reflecting in their troubled eyes. The gunslinger lowered himself to the earth, nestling the baby closer, feeling the light flutter of tiny fingers against his rough skin. He thought of the long road behind and the uncertain path ahead, but most of all, of the fragile spark of hope this child represented. Hours stretched, and when the council's decision came, it was neither warm nor easy. They would protect the child, but the alliance came with a price. Vigilance and doubt would shadow every step. The gunslinger understood. In the unforgiving West, trust was a scarce currency, earned only through bloodshed or sacrifice. As the enclave settled into a wary peace, the night deepened, stars blinking cold witness overhead. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Sharp cracks of gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder across the canyon walls. The enclave stirred instantly. Warriors grabbed weapons, faces hardening with shock and fury. From the eastern ridge, dark figures emerged, followers of the dark shaman, moving with deliberate, brutal purpose. Their attack was swift and ferocious, catching many off guard. Flames leapt from torches as the first volley disrupted the fragile haven. The gunslinger's hand went instantly to his Colt, firing with ragged precision. Taina moved beside him, her revolver steady and unforgiving. The baby's cries pierced through the chaos, a haunting reminder of all at stake. Amid the smoke and dust, the defenders rallied, but the assailants pressed relentlessly. The sound of clashing steel rang sharply, the battle unfolding with desperate urgency. The gunslinger's years of survival sharpened every movement as he ducked and fired, a whirlwind of hardened skill guarding the child like a lion defending its cub. Yet, despite the fierce resistance, cracks appeared in their defense. Timbers of fear and doubt crept into the minds of some, unsettling the fragile unity that held the enclave together. Shadows lengthened, darkness pressing hard as the monstrous threat bore down on their sanctuary. Suddenly, a cry echoed above the gunfire. Taina had been struck, collapsing amid the chaos. The gunslinger's breath caught, fury and despair tightening his throat. He lunged toward her, sweeping her into his arms with a strength fueled by desperation. Her eyes met his, fierce but fading. "Protect the child," she whispered, voice barely above the wind's howl. The gunslinger nodded fiercely, the promise burning hotter than the flames engulfing their world. I will, he vowed, voice raw with unyielding resolve, no matter what comes. As the attackers bore down, the gunslinger braced himself, gripping the baby tighter, the amulet's faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat of defiance. The Enclave's fate, inextricably linked to the fragile life he carried, hung in the balance. In the midst of the tumult, the gunslinger spotted movement, a figure breaking through the turmoil, dark and swift like a shadow made flesh. His Colt raised, every sinew taut, he prepared to face the darkness closing in. The baby's murmurs calmed the storm in his soul. The fight was far from over, and suddenly, as the clash reached its fevered peak, the infant vanished. The gunslinger's gaze snapped to the empty arms he'd thought safe. The child was gone. The shadow of the dark shaman closed tighter, and with it, the harsh dawn of battle promised only one certainty. The fight for the message from heaven had taken a perilous new turn. The canyon air pulsed with the rhythm of gunfire, sharp and unyielding, as the Enclave's defenders fought desperately to repel the onslaught unleashed by the dark shaman's followers. The night was a tempest of flashes, muzzle flares dancing like fleeting stars amid a choke of dust and smoke. The gunslinger moved like a shadow born of the very land, calm, precise, lethal, interweaving ancient skill with raw instinct. His Colt spat fire, each shot a whispered vow to guard the precious life in his arms. The Apache baby, swaddled tightly against his chest, remained remarkably serene amid the storm, her dark eyes reflecting a flickering glow. Around them, the Enclave's warriors sprang into action, their voices fierce and commanding, a resonant chorus of resolve against the cruel tide. Yet the battle was not solely of arms and bullets. Strange phenomena stirred within the chaos. Embers of light wove inexplicably through the night air, dancing like will-o'-the-wisps, untouched by the violent gusts that snuffed out torches nearby. A sudden chill unfurled across the battlements, the breeze, bittersweet, extinguishing flames, yet leaving the baby's amulet ablaze with an ethereal radiance. To the gunslinger, these were whispers from beyond, omens that tethered the child's fragile heartbeat to forces old as the earth itself. Tayana, grim-faced and unflinching, fired with steady hands. Beside him, her revolver a beacon of resistance. But even her iron grit could not stem the cruel swell of adversaries. From the periphery, dark figures slipped through shattered stone and scattered debris, weaving with devastating precision. Then, a flash too swift for thought. A cloaked assailant, a shadow incarnate, sprang through the turmoil. The gunslinger's heart plummeted as the figure's fingers snatched the battered leather pack from his saddlebag, the repository of secrets, maps, and documents vital to their desperate survival. No! The cry tore through the cacophony, raw and ragged. Without hesitation, the gunslinger surged forward, boots pounding broken rock, muscles taut with fury and grim determination. His voice, rough as the desert wind, cursed the thief's fleeting form. Tayana's voice cut sharply behind him. That pack is our lifeline, the prophecy's core. Lose it, and all hope withers. The ruins twisted like a cruel maze, labyrinthine and unyielding, shadows snaring every breath. The thief's steps echoed with mocking silence, teasing victory. But the gunslinger's resolve was steel-bound. No longer a lone drifter fleeing ghosts. He was a man reborn by purpose, the protector of a sacred message wrapped in mortal flesh. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the chase, piercing the night's tension. Taina's voice rang out, desperate and fierce. "They've taken me." The words burned like fire. The gunslinger skidded to a halt, senses sharpened to electric alert. His arms instinctively tightened around the small body against his chest, the fragile pulse beneath his palm, the only anchor against a swelling storm of fury and dread. Vulnerability surged like a savage tide, their tenuous alliance, now a fragile thread, threatened by merciless hands. The dark shaman's shadow lurked nearer, relentless and cold. Breath ragged, the gunslinger's mind sharpened with a brutal clarity. Protect the child, rescue Taina, confront the encroaching darkness. The chill of the night deepened. Silence swallowed the brief aftershock of that cry, pregnant with peril, yet burning with unyielding defiance. Amid the maze of stones and shadows, the faint, pulsing glow of the baby's amulet persisted, a beacon in the storm, a message from heaven carried by fragile hands. The fight had grown personal. There was no turning back. The gunslinger's breath came ragged as he skidded to a halt beneath the jagged shadow of the canyon walls, the fragile body of the Apache baby pressed tightly against his chest. Taina's piercing scream still echoed in his ears, a raw, desperate sound that sliced through the chaos like a blade. He inhaled sharply, biting back the surge of fury and despair that threatened to overwhelm him. She was gone, taken by the dark shaman's followers. The world around him seemed to hold its breath. Every muscle tensed, every instinct sharpened to a cruel edge. His gaze swept the maze of ancient stone and shifting shadows, searching for any sign of movement, any clue to her captor's path. The amulet around the baby's neck pulsed softly, a heartbeat of light amid the encroaching darkness, a reminder of the fragile hope that still flickered. The gunslinger's hardened eyes burned with a clarity born of desperation. His past, heavy with blood and regret, no longer bound him as chains, but fueled his resolve. This was no longer a man running from ghosts. It was a man fighting for redemption, for a future reborn. He slipped through the narrow passages of the ruin like a shadow, senses attuned to every whisper, every broken echo of sound. Then, from the distance, faint hoofbeats, the cult's relentless hounds. Their presence was a cruel certainty, a dark wave pressing upon him. Yet, he would not yield. Not now. When the stakes were more than life or death, they were the soul of a land struggling to survive its scars. Suddenly, the silent stillness of the night shattered with a piercing cry, a newborn's wail carried on the dry wind. The gunslinger's head snapped toward the sound, heart pounding fiercely, hope flaring painfully in his chest. The child was near. The message from heaven had not been snatched away entirely. Spurred by that fragile thread, he pressed forward until a faint light shimmered between the broken walls, a flicker of something sacred and real. There, Bound but defiant, stood Taina. Her dark eyes met his, fierce yet weary, and the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly, a sign of trust renewed even in the depths of hardship. Without hesitation, he drew his Colt, firing into the night with determined precision. Taina's captors faltered, their ranks wavering in the face of his wrath. The battle was brutal, but mercilessly swift. Each shot a testament to his vow, each step driven by a fierce promise to reclaim what had been stolen. As the last shadow fell silent, the gunslinger rushed to Taina's side, cutting her bonds with trembling hands. Her skin was cool beneath his touch. Sweat and grime mingled with the dust of the land they fought to save. "Safe now," he whispered, lifting her gently. Taina's eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat, then opened, steady and unbroken. "The child, what of her?" "He's here," the gunslinger said, nodding toward the small bundle still secure against his chest. The amulet's soft glow seemed to pulse stronger now, a beacon that neither shadow nor fear could dim. Together, they moved swiftly from the ruins toward the distant light of the Apache enclave, where hope awaited amid wary eyes and ancient wisdom. The council of elders watched as the gunslinger presented the child, their silence heavy with skepticism and centuries of pain. But something had changed. The fierce courage in the gunslinger's gaze and the soft glow emanating from the amulet stirred long-dormant respect. Taina spoke with quiet authority, recounting the trials and battles waged in the child's name. Slowly, the council's doubt gave way to cautious acceptance. The fragile alliance between man and tribe, forged in fire and blood. One elder stepped forward, the lines on his weathered face deepened by years, eyes glinting with newfound hope. "This child carries the message of our ancestors, a call to mend the wounds and walk together into a new dawn." His voice was a solemn benediction, carrying the weight of generations. The gunslinger lowered himself to the earth, cradling the baby tenderly. In that moment, the hard edges of his soul softened, as if the desert itself exhaled a long-held breath. He had found not just redemption, but a purpose, beyond vengeance and survival. Taina joined him, steady and resolute, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The path ahead will not be easy. Old wounds burn deep, and the dark shaman's shadow still lingers. But together, tribes and settlers, we can forge a different future. The child stirred, raising tiny fingers toward the glowing amulet, a symbol of unity and hope beyond language and blood. The gunslinger met Taina's gaze, silent vow passing between them, a promise to protect this fragile flame amid the unforgiving wilds. As night softened into the pale glow of dawn, the horizon stretched wide, uncertain, yet filled with possibility. The scars of the past would not vanish overnight, but beneath that vast sky, a new chapter was beginning. The gunslinger stood, shoulders squared beneath the weight of his newfound resolve. The wind carried the whispers of the old and the promise of the new, a message from heaven not lost, but kindled anew by the courage of a man, a woman, and a child. In that quiet morning light, the frontier was no longer a place of endless shadows, but a land where hope could take root, fragile yet unbroken. shaping a future born from the ashes of the past. The gunslinger had become more than a legend of the West. He was a guardian of that hope, a beacon for those lost in the wilderness of their own souls. And as the baby's gentle breaths mingled with the dawn, the silent message carried by heaven itself whispered on the wind. Unity, redemption, and the enduring strength to build a new world together.